He's Chris Moody. He's a political reporter for Yahoo News. Chris Moody, Al Cardenas was not so excited about Chris Christie last year, was he?
What happened?
Well, there's definitely a history between those two. Back at CPAC, which you know is the largest annual conference of conservatives, in 2013, last year, right after the presidential election, CPAC basically snubbed Chris Christie and said, you know what, you're not invited. And they had a long list of reasons to do so. If you remember back to the 2012 presidential elections, Christie kind of gushed over President Obama's response to Superstorm Sandy. He also had some sharp words for House Republicans. And conservatives just said, you know what, we don't want you at our conference. But this year, they've kind of pushed that back a little bit, and they're looking ahead, and Chris Christie will speak at the conference in March.
Yesterday, Chris Christie got on the radio and started talking about this scandal. Again, sort of throwing down pretty firm denial that he knew anything. He didn't have any scintilla, no advance knowledge, not one whit of information about the whole traffic scandal there in Fort Lee, New Jersey.
Well, he's absolutely taking his message straight to the people. He's going on the offensive on this, very much so, not just talking to lawmakers and not just talking to activists, but to voters by going on a radio show like that and taking questions about it. Now, he better make sure that every single word he says is true and that he's choosing his words carefully because, look, Democrats smell blood in the water here, and they're going to go over all the documents they can get their hands on with a fine-tooth comb, and if they can find one small thing that looks like he's misleading, they're going to jump on it and try to ruin his chances for 2016.
Well, yeah, and Chris Moody, I mean, you're right. They smell blood in the water, and so does the New York Times and every other newspaper and television station and cable news network up in New York. I'm wondering, as a political reporter, someone who has to be a little circumspect when a juicy story lands in your lap, what's your opinion of how the media handled that story that turned out kind of to be a non-story on Friday about the governor of New Jersey?
Well, I think something we have to be very careful to communicate to our readers is that there is a big difference between Chris Christie knowing about the plan to shut down the bridge before it happened and just knowing that it was happening as the bridge closure was going on. I mean, when that was happening, it was big news at the time. People were noticing it, people were reporting it. So if Chris Christie knew that there were problems at the bridge when it was happening, that's not news. That's not news at all, and that seems to be what was talked about over the weekend at the New York Times.
Yeah.
But what would be news, something we don't have yet, is that he knew about it beforehand. Now, there's a bunch of documents that are going to come out over the next couple of weeks and months, and that'll give us a really good opportunity to see whether or not he knew before. But, of course, there are some people that are not releasing documents, so I have a feeling this is going to be something that's going to go on for several more weeks, if not months.
Well, and I want to play just a little bit of what Chris Christie had to say. As you have stated, he's about as adamant as one can be that he had no advance knowledge about this. Here it is.
When did I first know about the lane closures?
Yeah.
The fact is that the first time this really came into my consciousness as an issue was when Pat Foy, the executive director of the Port Authority's email about this incident was leaked to the media and reported on. And that was the first time that I got a sense that there might be some issue here.
And who brought that to your attention? Was that staff?
No, it was news accounts. I mean,
But you read them personally, or did somebody bring it to your attention?
No, I read it.
You read it. Okay.
I read it in the Wall Street Journal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're the governor and you're standing by the story that you absolutely didn't know about it until you read about it in the newspaper or on the wire
He
services.
even cited the newspaper.
Yeah,
This is so specific.
Yeah, I mean, he's very, very adamant about this. As you say, that's going to come apart in a big way. This whole Christie thing could just blow up if there is one scintilla of evidence. He's making a very, very definitive statement.
All it's going to take is one email that from him or to him that describes anything about this that will blow up that story, but we don't have that yet. There's a lot of smoke right now, but there certainly isn't a fire or a smoking gun that we can see now.
I guess my larger question, Chris, is most politicians are smart enough to not make such a definitive statement unless they are really, really sure.
Well, that leaves two possibilities. Either he's needs to learn to be a better politician, or he's really being honest here, and he's dead sure that he didn't know a thing about it. And I think within a couple of weeks, we're going to know which one it is.
Also, in a couple of weeks, we're going to welcome the good governor right here to our fair town, Washington, D.C. I want to swing back to this CPAC event that's going to happen the first weekend in March, Chris Moody, because you listen, you cover this stuff, you understand the political movement and the conservative movement specifically. You've been to CPACs before. When Chris Christie takes the podium at CPAC 2014, how do you think he's going to be received?
This is a great question. Well, March is a eternity away in political time, so who knows what's going to happen to him in that period. But Christie has a sordid history with the conservative movement. Some people see him as a bit of a rhino, a Republican in name only, kind of as a moderate. So people are skeptical of him. But what I've seen is people are also intrigued. They want to hear from him. They want to give him a shot. And I think people are going to listen, and I'm sure he'll tailor his message to the crowd. But conservatives are smart. They know somebody who's faking it when they see it. I think they looked at Mitt Romney when he came to CPAC a couple years ago, and he said he was severely conservative. People laughed, and Chris Christie really can't do that. He can't pull a Mitt Romney, but I think it's going to be a packed house to see him, standing room only, and that includes media and people at the conference.
And a cynic may suggest that maybe that's why Al Cardenas and the American Conservative Union shifted here and invited him, because they're going to get a whole lot of attention.
Yeah, and I think it was a smart move because people want to see their perspectives for 2016 presidential candidates. A CPAC at times can be a little bit of a casting call for presidential candidates, and I think it's important for them to have the whole slate of possibilities. So I think Cardenas made the right move here.
Let me ask you another question that's sort of off the wall. Mitt Romney's been getting a lot of favorable coverage of late. It has a lot to do with this documentary that's out there, Mitt, which, by the way, I'd recommend. Very interesting documentary. Do you suspect that, and he says he's not interested, do you suspect that this is, that somehow that he wouldn't mind being dragged back into the fight again?
Well, I think he enjoys not being under the tough scrutiny that comes with being a candidate. The nice part about losing is that you can kind of reshape your brand and become more of a lovable person that, he doesn't have to make tough decisions. He can be a guy that people like a little bit better. I don't see him running again in 2016. It's very difficult to come back as the loser. And to quote him when he was asked about it, I think he said, No.
I know, but that's what you would say, right?
Yeah.
Well, I just find it interesting that he's got the greatest name idea of any Republican out there right now, and most of the coverage of late has been favorable.
May I suggest Sarah Palin might have some pretty good name ID as well. Chris Moody is the political reporter from Yahoo News. Follow him on Twitter. I do. It's Chris_Moody, and it's always fun when he starts giving Robert Costa over there at the Washington Post a hard time on Twitter. We like that, Chris Moody.
I love Robert Costa, one of the best in the business.
Thanks for joining us. We'll ask him if he agrees.